we are gradually working our way through a set of topics which come from Buddhist origin, which are like a sequence of character strengths or virtues or trainings, which, if you can master them, they lead sequentially towards more transcendental attainments, which support meditation. And at the moment we are working our way through a group of those character strengths, which you might refer to as sort of soft skills. Recently we've looked at things like respect, and this is the second part of a talk about humility, and where it's going from here will be things like gratitude. So this is the territory we are making our way through at the moment. And last time I saw you, which was on Thursday, I mentioned that humility is not quite the same as respect. Respect is more to do with doing the opposite of fault-finding, which is to try to find things which are good in the people, the situations, the objects we come across, something that we can learn from. So picking up on what's good in the things around us. As for humility, it's more to do with how we see ourselves, which means instead of thinking that we're already great and have no room for improvement, even though we might be pretty great, but we can still see some things that we need to improve upon. So it's the opposite of basically being an arrogant person who thinks they know it all, or they're already the bee's knees. So last time we tried to describe what humility was, and today we are looking a little bit more about how we might cultivate humility if we need more of it. And it is one of the subjects which sounds pretty easy to understand in theory, but it's quite hard to cultivate for real in one's character. And I'll start with more general advice on this topic, and then move on to more specifically Buddhist advice for its cultivation. So basically, humility is to do with maybe the recognition that you are not always right, and you don't always have all the answers. So it requires a sort of acceptance of yourself, warts and all, which some people find quite challenging. And some people find it quite easy to be humble when they're at the bottom of the food chain, but when they get increasingly higher up in their job or in their commitments or responsibilities, then when other people start treating you like you're infallible, then sometimes it's quite tempting to sort of believe them. And if you're not careful, then at the moment when you really need humility the most, you can end up in a senior position, but with a chronic case of arrogance. So being humble is one of the most admirable characteristics which a person can have, but unfortunately it's quite hard to find it in today's world. Often the people who are humble, we fail to notice them because they don't really stand out because they're humble. Because they tend not to talk about their accomplishments unless people really press them. They tend to be rather understated. And you might not really notice anything special about them apart from the fact that they're just a kind and sort of sympathetic person. And often, although they might be quite confident within themselves because they don't need validation from anyone else, then they never go out asking for it. So humble people tend to forget they're probably not the best person in the room, but they actually thrive in that environment because then they can learn a lot from all the other people around them with that realization. So there are as many as 12 different ways in which it's recommended that if we are somehow lacking in humility, then we might improve on that. So I've summarized this down from the usual sources. And probably a good place to start is to realize or to admit that you're not the best. Even though you might have tried your hardest to be great at what you do, you still have some way to go. And the second thing is to recognize that along with the best parts of ourselves, that we still have our flaws. That being human comes with both strengths and weaknesses. And the faster you can accept that, then the faster humility will follow in its wake. The third thing is to be grateful for what you have, and there's going to be a blessing dealing with this specifically a little further down the line. But in brief, if you're the sort of person who takes the time to count your blessings and be thankful for them, then it's a good way to have a more humble and a positive state of mind. Often the sense of gratitude comes with the realization that the good things that do come to you, or which you do have, aren't simply by your own independent abilities, but there have been other people who have supported you to get to that point as well. Sometimes that's quite humbling in itself. Fourth thing is to admit when you've made mistakes, what they call owning it these days, rather than immediately blaming your subordinates or deflecting or being defensive. Fifth way is to ask for help when you need it. Sometimes a sense of arrogance comes with the sense of thinking that we can solve all our own problems all by ourselves, when in fact we really are kidding ourselves. And the sixth thing, checking your own language, because often what you say tends to betray the thoughts that are under the surface, which might be things like arrogance or smugness or snobbery or vanity. Sometimes we can be slightly proud of ourselves, and it often feels quite pleasant to be like that. If we've done something good, then that's fair enough, and everyone is praising us, then that's good too. But if we don't realize when we've sort of floated away from the sense of reality in those situations, then we tend to get carried away. And you need to constantly ask yourself, was that snobbish that I said that, or was I a little bit vain in what I was saying? So if you can name those things, then you will be in less danger of slipping into arrogance. Something not boasting. Have you heard me talk about the half-full bottle? Can't remember when I mentioned it. So, but if you have a bottle, it's not a bottle, but it's half full. If you shake a half-full bottle, it tends to make a lot of noise. Just as people who are half full with abilities tend to draw everyone's attention to what little they have the whole of the time in a very in-your-face sort of way. But a bottle that's completely full, actually if you shake it, it doesn't make any noise at all. And that would be more the sort of humble person who doesn't need to say anything because the bottle is already full, as it were. Yeah. So boasting is generally a sign of a lack of something. Yeah. So can you, in an understated sort of way, mention what you are good at? Probably not in Britain. But generally the rule goes something like, when questioned specifically, you might just mention what you have achieved in an oblique manner without exaggeration. Number 9, try to be more considerate to others. Because if you are more empathetic towards other people and how they feel, it will make you less self-centered. It's a rule. Appreciate others. That's the origin of the sort of kindness and sort of lack of guile that you see in humble people. And that sort of thing can mean a lot to other people as well, which means that you're caring more about them than you are about yourself. Putting others first, the selfless sort of nature is a good training. Even just letting a person go ahead of you in traffic and that sort of thing is actually quite good for the soul. Listening more carefully to other people. One of the facets of an arrogant person is they're constantly trying to dominate a conversation and talk about themselves. But if you catch yourself doing that and just stand back and listen for a change to what other people are saying, it's actually quite a good antidote for that. And also, although you might think you're being sympathetic to people by trying to solve all their problems all the time, sometimes the important thing is not that you solve their problems, but sometimes that you listen to them. And last thing is to seek feedback from others on a regular basis. Sort of keeps things real. In fact, there's another blessing a little bit further down the line, especially to do with this as well. So listening to any feedback you get openly and also being grateful for that. From the Buddhist point of view, there are a few extra things which can be added to the general wisdom on being more humble. First being to avoid people who flatter you, the yay-sayers. Being surrounded by them the whole time is generally not a good environment to cultivate humility, because everyone's saying you great the whole time and you tend to believe them. So actually, if you realize that you have a tendency towards sort of delusions of grandeur in this sort of way, then maybe trying to find a few friends who are honest with you would be a better policy. Second thing is to be thorough in the things that you do, with thought of how it may come over in other people's eyes. And I won't go into too much detail, but let's say the way you dress, the car you drive, the opinions you express, and whether you claim ownership of ideas can all be considered as arrogant behaviors if you're not careful by other people. So by saying thorough, think about these things before you do them, and just try to see how it might appear in other people's eyes if you are thinking to reduce that sort of image of arrogance which you might be suffering from. And the third way is, of course, to practice more mindfulness, focusing on the present, accepting a situation, accepting yourself even with your faults, not saying don't try to do anything about those faults, but the important thing is generally that if you accept them, give them space, then you can then do something about them. Instead of feeling somehow you have a chip on your shoulder that you have to get defensive about it. One sort of mindfulness you might not have heard about is mindfulness of the transience of life, memento mori. Say if you're getting too big for your shoes, then remember that a coffin's never too big for anyone. And it usually will sort of bring you back to your senses about and perspective about what's actually the important things in your life. Yeah. And a little story from a monk who was particularly humble. One we've met before. I think we had him leaping over canals in one of the previous talks. You remember him? Climbing trees to sleep at night? Well, this is a slightly different, same monk, but a slightly different occasion. His name is Sāriputta, and he was one of the most gifted disciples of the Buddha, sometimes referred to as the right-hand disciple of the Buddha because he was so good at explaining the Buddha's ideas and teaching about them. And his story illustrates the connection very strongly between mindfulness and humility, because there was once another monk in the same community who had a certain grudge against Sāriputta, and he accused him of having bumped into him and not apologizing. So, obviously not a humble thing to do. So the Buddha requested to Sāriputta to justify himself against this accusation, which wasn't a true one. He made it up. And Sāriputta explained, because I am a person who is steadfast in mindfulness, so don't go around bumping into people like that, I am careful of everything I do. I am mindful of the body with just the same care, and here comes the metaphor, that a person carrying a tray filled to the brim with oil, usually boiling oil sometimes, being stalked by someone brandishing a sword, should he spill a single drop? Get the idea? The same sort of mindfulness is required to walk along with that sort of threatening person behind you without spilling a single drop of oil. Is the same sort of mindfulness he aimed to cultivate for himself in all things in life. And in the same way, my humility can be compared with being like a doormat, he says a rag duster, a bull with broken horns, so obviously no threat to anyone, like an untouchable child who blunders into the village of another caste, all of whom have no opportunity to indulge in their own self-importance. So despite his attainments, he didn't claim to any of those, didn't boast about them, he made no mention of those, but he just mentioned that he had no self-importance or arrogance in the way he treated others. So if such a gifted monk can be humble, then who are we to look down on others? Within the Thai tradition, there's also a special way to cultivate humility, which is seen in the national tradition. They have Teacher's Day once a year in Thailand. Do they have that here? I think they have a lot of kids' days, mums and dads' days, but I don't think they have Teacher's Day, right? Well, they have Teacher's Day in Thailand, and it's the day when they have a special ceremony for all the grateful pupils to show their respect for their teacher. Okay, it comes somewhere in January. So this ceremony is called Waikru. All teachers are sitting on a chair, or the kids are sitting on the floor, and they present them with a tray of special offerings which have a symbolic meaning. And this is a gesture of respect to show themselves to be worthy of the teacher's teachings throughout the year. And on the tray, on the little inset there are three things which are always on the tray along with other things. Not an apple for the teacher. But the three things. First is aubergine flowers. Or are you more familiar with eggplant? Aubergine? Yeah? So 1 aubergine flowers, 2 coarse grass, and third thing is popcorn. And each one has a symbolic meaning. The eggplant flower or aubergine flower always hangs down. Have you ever grown any? Courgettes? Ring a bell? It's only the ones that hang their head down that will give any fruit. And in such the same way, the flowers which hold their head high will never have fruit. In the same way, humility, so this is what it's a symbol of, as a quality of every student to receive the teacher's knowledge to the full. So just as water flows downhill, then knowledge will flow towards those who are humble from someone who has more knowledge. As for the other two, which are sort of by the way, the coarse grass represents patience, because coarse grass is the sort of thing that you can find on the cracks in the pavement that gets squashed every day but still grows back tougher than before. Yeah, patience. And the other one is popcorn, which has to endure the heat in order to pop and become something you can eat. You all know the bits of the popcorn that you break your teeth on, right? Those were the ones that generally didn't go through the heat. So that is a symbol of self-discipline, a person who can take the heat and come out tender. Yeah. As for these qualities of effective learning, sensitivity for sense improvement, we do look at them further in number 27. I'll leave you with one story today, and it's a historical story about slavery. Usually slavery is a very politically sensitive issue, so sensitive that at various times in history it has caused a lot of strife in any nation's history. If you look at the United States, then abolition of slavery caused a civil war. I think I can say that without exaggerating. And many other countries, then there's been a lot of violence as a result of giving up slavery. For Thailand originally, and this is going back to mid-1800s, they also had some slaves too. And it was in the reign of King Rama V that, because he was a monarch it was a time of absolute monarchy as well, so he had sort of full power to do what he liked basically, he still had the quality of humility, despite his position. And he wanted to, because he was quite a forward-thinking monarch, borrowed a lot of his ideas from the West, he decided that Thailand, to be seen as a civilized country, ought to also give up slavery. So he went to his advisors and he asked them how to go about this to ensure the minimum of strife and bloodshed. And his advisors gave him some good advice, was basically just try to get your foot in the door. Because he knew that the slaves were the most important convenience to a lot of the most influential people in the country. If he just said, oh, no more slaves, then he's going to get a lot of enemies overnight. And 99% would immediately refuse if he came up with a change in the law like that. So he sent a bunch of researchers out into society and asked what was the attitude to slaves in the general population. And he found out that many of the old slaves who'd been slaves all their life, who were 60 or 70 years old in many cases, if they were released, then they wouldn't really know what to do with their lives. So what should they do? So the king was very humble, and he made a very simple law in 1874 stipulating that anyone who had been born into slavery since 1868, so like 6 years before, would become a free man on reaching the age of 21. So basically it applies to all the children. Very simple law. And that after this law had been decreed, no more children would enter slavery anymore. So the input to the slavery population would be basically petered out. Yeah? So 10 years later, pretty much all the old slaves had all sort of passed on. And all the slave masters looked for new slaves, but the new law said there couldn't be any new ones. So little by little, very gently, slaves sort of became extinct in the population of Thailand, not because they weren't there anymore, but because they had all become free citizens. And because he'd done it so gently and so in such a unannounced sort of way, not a single drop of blood was spilled along the way. So that was all because of the humility of the king in Thailand at the time. So in summary, being humble is important as a thing to develop because it improves the quality of your relationships with other people and allows you to listen to others more than you talk about yourself. And at the end of the day, it says a lot about your character and your values. So really becoming a more humble person is a big favor you can do to yourself. However, it doesn't come easy, but it's an important part of your self-development. And people will always remember you for your kindness and for your modesty, because it's admired by in any society that you might enter. So for today, for those of you who are new to meditation, I would just like to say that if you enjoyed meditation today, found that it was something that felt promising for you, then I would encourage you to meditate at home if you can, daily if you can, maybe for 20 minutes a day. Less than that, you may not see a great deal of change in your quality of mind, but if you can work 20 minutes into your daily schedule somehow, then little by little it will start to take root and you'll start to see an improvement in your meditation by itself. So it might be first thing in the morning, it might be last thing at night, it could even be in your lunch break, but if you can find a place in your routine for meditation, then it will become something that you find will save you time in other places because you're thinking more clearly about the way you spend your time. If you are looking for guidance for meditation when you're at home, you may find the MindGem app useful because it has lots of audio tracks on it which you can follow along with of different lengths, which you can gradually build up or find different approaches to the meditation that might suit you the best. Here we have in-person classes. Someone asked me whether they go on all year round. It's true that generally over the Christmas period we stop the classes. So I think we have classes on the 20th and 22nd of December, if anyone's free from all that Christmas shopping or whatever. But from Christmas to New Year that week, then I don't think anyone will turn up anyway, even if we did hold the classes. But you can still come if you like, because we're all still here, but probably doing other things like preparing for the retreat. Yeah. So you notice that Thursday evening has slightly longer meditation time. That's the only difference. Online, we still have the Dhammakaya Meditation Europe activity every Saturday evening between 7 and 8 p.m. British time, between 8 and 9 European time, and the Zoom coordinates are there for you. And the next full moon meditation will be on the 8th of December, coinciding with the Thursday class on the theme of family harmony in the holiday season. And that will be online as well for those who are interested. And the informal New Year retreat taking place wasn't really designed for Westerners like yourself, but it turns out that a lot of our Western meditators actually have free time at Christmas and New Year when they don't have any free time at any other time of the year. So we have already a small group of people joining us for that, and we'll do it in bilingual for the late morning and afternoon classes at the very least. So if you're interested to come along for that, you can come for parts of it. You can turn up in the morning and go home at night. If you wish, there are many flexible ways of joining that. But I don't think we would do it online this time. We'd allow people to join it and get the in-person experience for a change. But if you're interested, then please speak to Kroban or Patrick about that.